Okie diddly dodly. I forgot my reading glasses again. All right, well, we'll see what we can do. Okay, so we've been looking at movies here. Let's kind of continue our discussion. And I think I'm going to kind of move some things around a bit here. Let's kind of look at the process of how this actually kind of starts. So we have some kind of concept, right? And this can be a story, a news item, true event, etc. Right? I mean, so you've got things like Titanic. Well, that's based upon the sinking of the ship. You've got these I think there's at least 2 different movies about people killing Osama bin Laden. You've got Superman. Well, that's a story out of comic books, things like that, right? And if the idea is interesting, of course, what a studio will do is they'll place an option on it. And as you guys probably know from your other classes, when you talk about an option, what does that mean? So when you talk about like the options market, what are we looking at? You want to place an option on buying stock in IBM. What does that do? Does it mean you have to buy IBM? No, it gives you the right? That's what the option does. So when we talk about placing an option, right, in essence what this does is that it gives them the right to act on it, if they choose to. They don't have to, right? So it's a set period of time. Maybe it's 3 years, right? We're going to place a 3-year option on this idea. After the end of 3 years, if we decide we don't want to do anything with it, the option expires. And of course, you got to pay for that option, just like you do with everything else, right? So maybe it's, okay, here's $20,000. We have the right to develop this over the next 3 years if we choose to. If we don't choose to, you keep the $20,000, all right? So if they decide to exercise the option, you have what's called a literary property agreement. And in this literary property agreement is where it outlines all of the rights to the movie, right? So who's going to be doing what? How much do you get? Here's your money up front, etc. All right? And this LPA here is often used to secure financing. So let's look at how these things are financed, right? We've got a couple of different sources. We've got industry sources. Okay, so this would be things like in-house financing, the distributor, distributor, distributor financing, TV networks, cable, Netflix, Amazon, etc. Right? I mean, you're starting to see more and more sources for the financing part coming out from all kinds of different places. We have lenders. Right? So these might be our banks, insurance companies, distributors, again. We can have investors. public and private. So some kind of pooling agreement. So we have partnerships, limited partnerships, pass-through partnerships, etc. Right? So you have lots of different people that are into financing, thinking of these, I'm not going to say their name right, I haven't, Maloof Brothers or something, they own a casino in Vegas, they wanted to get into movies, they opened up essentially a partnership that finances movies because they wanted to get into movie finance, and so they pay the money up front to make the movie, and then they use that to get paid. We have limited partnerships. P-A-R-T-N-E-R. All right. So these can be things like tax shelters. Allow people to invest. Movies, right? And in some instances, in some different ways, maybe in here we'll issue some stock that's publicly traded or not publicly traded. And interestingly enough, with a lot of these things, I mean, like I said, I mean, there's not like what's the standard format. I mean, you have lots of different ways that these guys are done through these partnerships and these public-private investors. Right? We have things like bank loans. So studios can raise cash. Via banks, right? So for example, like Bank of America has a division that deals just in international economics, right? In exchange rates. They have a division that deals in oil and gas, right? JP Morgan has a division that just deals with movies. That's their only job. So this group of little people within this division, I don't know how large the division is, all their job all day long is to read all this stuff, get a sense of, okay, here's the outline for this movie. How much is this thing likely to make? If we loan Warner Brothers money for this, how likely are we to get our money back, right? And there's several different of the large banks, the JP Morgan Chases, Bank of America, et cetera. They have their own little separate division that just deals with movies. It's not like you go to the bank and get a car loan, all right? That's all they do all day long. And then you have private equity and hedge funds. The private equity and the hedge funds oftentimes can be financed by pension plans. So remember what you've got happening here. You've got, when you're making your movie, and we've kind of seen this already to a degree, we haven't seen it fully yet. But here's our timeline. Here's our date of release. And here's time going forward. Here's time going back, right? And back through here is when we're making the movie. And here's where it's released to box office. And then it went through all these other windows, etc. Well, these are these different time periods, T1, T2, T3, T4, etc. Well, we may be getting revenue from this guy way out here in T40. here we are, negative T4. I'm just thinking of Star Wars, right? The thing was released in 1977. So here's its date of release, 1977. They didn't make the movie in 1977. They're shooting it in 1976 and 1975 and 1974. It took them 3 years at the time. You've got all of the stuff that goes before that to do it, all the LPA stuff, all of the getting together and deciding who's going to be in it, who's going to be the director of photography, who's going to be doing all the stuff, where are you going to shoot it at, all of that type of stuff. So you have all of these expenses that are occurring here that have to be financed, right? This guy wants to get paid. This lawyer right here, who was dealing with the literary property agreement for Star Wars in 1974, wants to get paid in 1974. He does not want to get paid in 2017. That ain't going to work, right? So how are you going to finance this guy? Because you are, in essence, financing a product that's going to produce a stream of income. Right? We remember net present value and all that kind of stuff, right? These dollars today, $100 today, and $100 10 years from now. Which is more valuable? The $100 today, why? Has nothing to do with inflation. Exactly. The $100 today can be invested, right? And whatever interest rate you want it to be, 1%, 2%, 10%, 15%, 30%, this $100 grows over time, right? So in essence, what you're doing is you're financing, have this large cost today over the first, now say -4, -3, -2, -1 years, whatever. And then you have a stream of income in the future. And that's where all of this financing comes from. Some of these movies cost a lot of money to make. But like Star Wars is still generating income 40 years later. So when we're looking at these production preliminaries, we have this cost, which we're going to call the negative cost. To make the picture. And it's not negative in the sense of negative time here. It's negative in the sense of like the film negatives. That's what they mean by that, right? You've got all the stuff that has to go up until the point to where you get to the film negatives. We've seen this guy go from about 9.4 million per film in 1980 to about 60 million today. And by today, I mean late 2000s. Right? So if you look at this as a compound annual growth rate, you're looking at a growth rate here of about 7.7%, right? Which is essentially basically twice as large as the growth rate of the U.S. economy during that time. And twice as large as the rate of inflation. So the question is, well, why would the cost of this go up faster than the rate of inflation? right? And you have a couple different reasons for this. For example, movie making is applied slightly differently to each movie. So we can get some economies of scale, but we can't get economies of scale like you get in, say, the car industry. All right? We want to make a car, we want to make the Model T. Well, we make that car the same way, and we can make that. Let's assume we had no changes in technology. We didn't want to change the way the car was made at all. Car 1 and car 1,000,000 can all be made in the exact same way. Right? It doesn't change. Comes on and off the assembly line in the exact same way. Movie making is a little bit different, right? You have a different set of crew, a different set of ways of setting up these movies each and every time. The locations can be different, right? You've got tax shelters that existed especially in the 70s and early 80s. And they changed the tax law. Reagan changed the tax law in 1986. He made it a lot simpler. He had a whole bunch of different rates. He made the number of rates go down to, I think it was 3 different brackets, and brought the rates down. And there was tons of tax shelters. Not just in movies, in everything. And you're still seeing some of these tax shelters today. We'll talk about them here in a few minutes. But in essence, if people are wanting to find a way to shield their income from taxes, movies were a great way to do it. Especially in the 70s and 80s, where tax rates could be as high as 70, 80, 90%. You also have this idea of, like, say, bankable stars. So the idea with a bankable star is that this is a star that people are going to go see no matter what. So when you're making Mission Impossible, you've got Tom Cruise in there, or you've got Fred, right, who's just as good of an actor and just as good looking as Tom Cruise, but nobody knows who Fred is. So think of 2 different worlds, 2 different states of the universe, one where Tom Cruise is in Mission Impossible, one where Fred is in Mission Impossible. Nobody's heard of Fred. The idea here is that, well, Tom Cruise is bankable. We know that if Tom Cruise is in there, people are going to come and see the movie just because he's in it. He's a bankable star. That's what we mean by that. Now, if the star is bankable, what does that mean for him in terms of his level of compensation? Exactly. He's essentially saying, look, you bring me on, that guarantees you X amount of revenue. And me guaranteeing you X amount of revenue means my costs are going to be whatever. You've also got the problems of tracking all of these costs. So you have what are called below-the-line costs. So these can be things like crew, vehicles, transportation, shelter, props, etc. Right. So if you have a location that's been scouted out, and it rains, and you need sun, all those people are getting paid, right? They're all under contract. The union rules say, well, the crew is sitting there. If it's raining, doesn't matter. They're getting paid. You're paying people to sit there. One of the interesting things about the directors that I don't think a lot of people going into film realize when they start going into it is how much the director is really a cost manager. He is a cost and time manager. That's his job. There is a strict schedule on when stuff should be shot and when stuff should not be shot, and how long you have to get all of this movie basically done. And the director's job is really to ensure that everything moves along, right? We have this idea that the director sits in this chair and he yells action, and he does to a degree, but really the director's job is to direct the production of the movie, to get things moving along. You have to stick to this time schedule. If it takes 2 hours to set up a scene, and that scene should have been shot in 1 hour, you're an hour over. So I'll give you an example, and you can see this on anything that you go to. I mean, any show that you watch, anything. You got two people talking, and then they cut to this person, and then they cut to this person, and then they're cutting to this person, and they're cutting to this person. It looks seamless, right? But in essence, what they're doing on any of these, so if it's, I mean, anything that you want it to be, any movie, if the person up there and he says 2 words, it was George, right? So it's 3 words. He says, you know, who was the guilty party? It was George, right? And then they cut to somebody else. That part where he's saying it was George, that could take an hour to set up. You have to get everything in the background right. You got to get the lighting all correct. You have to get the person to stand there. They might say it multiple times, right? So it's very, very easy for things to go way out of control in terms of cost, right? So if the guy shows up and he's drunk and he can't say it was George, right? And then they have to wait till you sober up and they can't get other stuff shot at the time, costs can just basically explode, right? It has the potential to be very, very expensive. You also have, of course, proliferation of unions. So you have our labor unions here, have all kinds of guidelines for compensation. Right. And you've got all of them, right? The directors are in a union, the actors are in a union, that's the SAG. The producers are in a union, the writers are in a union, the crew is in a union. All of the union rules have to be followed. So we've made our movie here. Now we want to show it. And we're going to have our distributor and exhibition contracts. Okay. So essentially the distributor designs the marketing campaign around 4 different quadrants. These quadrants are male, female, young, old, all right? So we can have our movies All right, so we can have our movies that are going to appeal to young males. We could have our movies that are going to appeal to old males. Our movies that appeal primarily to young females. Our movies that appeal primarily to old females. Now, what do you think this age metric is here? 25. So I am considered old, right? You guys are close to getting old in the movie industry parlance. You're close to being an older audience, all right? So after they've kind of set up their campaign, they have set up the release. Or these different respective theaters. Right? And they might do all kinds of different ways to find out which types of theaters do they want to open it in, where are these people going to be at, right? So for example, there's more young people in Silicon Valley than there are in, I'm thinking like Utah or North Dakota, right? Ohio. You have a different set of type of male young audience in Silicon Valley than you do in Southwest Ohio, right? And they might do all kinds of different things to just figure out which ones they want to do. So they will have kind of what they have basically are initial screenings. I've actually been to one of these. I was walking. It's just basically they literally cut people off the street. They got me off the street and they're like, watch this movie. Okay. And you watch the movie, and then at the end, you fill out this big old survey. What did you think of this movie? Was it any good? Did you like this ending? Blah, blah, blah. It's fascinating. All right? And then they compile all that stuff together, and they say, okay, based upon that, we know that we think this movie is going to do type of this. Right? Because there's all kinds of people, like myself, economists and accountants in Hollywood, that have sat in there and looked at all of this data and have said, okay, based upon this data, what do we expect this stream of income to do, right? Here's our box office release. We want to know what's going to happen out here and out here and out here and out here, right? This guy helps predict what these numbers are going to be. These guys can help predict what this guy is going to be. So if the screenings show box office is going to be very weak, and if we know that if box office is weak in these types of markets with these types of people, that means these types of streams of income are going to be smaller than what they should be otherwise. One way to cut your losses is to not have a wide release, to have basically a very narrow release, or open it in just a few markets or whatever. Okay. So once we've decided that, we have our distributor and we have our exhibition contracts go out. And in essence, these are pretty obvious, right? They're fairly standard contract for the exhibitors, right? These are essentially the movie theaters. And they have what is called the exhibitor's nut. All right. So these are in essence the house expenses. So these are things like electricity, utility bills, mortgage, telephone, insurance, etc. Okay? So we have what in essence is, you can kind of think of it almost really as like a fixed cost. Here's what the fixed cost is to have the building there. And typically the way these contracts run, although they can vary, you'll have, say, maybe the first or possibly into the second week of box office, you have some sort of changing percentage. So it might be 70-30. 70% to the distributor, 30% to the theater. So let's just assume it's for the first 2 weeks we got a 70-30 split. And then in week 3, it becomes, say, 60-40. And then in week 4, maybe it's 50-50, right? And then in week 5, maybe it changes again to 40-60, right? So if the thing is still showing after 5 weeks, 60% is going to the theater, 40% is going to the distributor. And of course, it may not be showing within the same theater 5 weeks down. It may be showing in a completely different theater, right? Now it's showing at the Moxie or whatever. So it's that sort of thing. Some of these could be this. "100% of ticket revenue for the first week goes to the distributor, 0% goes to the theater." The last Star Wars movie that came out, not Rogue One, but the one before that, what was that? The theater made no money from ticket sales. No theater in America made money from any ticket sales. The one that's coming out in December, what do you think is going to be like? It's that guy right there. I guarantee it. The contracts are already set, right? 100% of box office revenue for the first week goes to the distributor, 0% goes to the theater. And typically, these contracts will also have some sort of minimum in there as well. So let's assume a nut of, say, $15,000 per week, all right? And like I said, you can kind of think of basically the theater's nut as like the fixed cost. It's not exactly that, but it's a little bit more than that, but let's assume that's what it is. And let's assume that in the first week, here's what the contract says. We got a 90-10 split with a 70% floor. Okay. So our distributor is going to get 90%. 10% is going to go to the theater, right? So this is the Carmike or the Moxie or whatever, you know, the physical place that you're actually at. So let's assume we have a box office here of 100,000. Okay? So when we're looking at our monies, we're going to say within our first week here, we've got this. We've got our 90-10 split, or we've got our 70% floor. Okay. So here's our 100,000 minus 15,000 equals 85,000 times 0.9. $76,500. Or our 70% floor, 100,000 times 0.7, 70,000. Right? So in essence, here's the two different options. And this is all spelled out in the contract. We got a 90-10 split after nut or a 70% floor. So with the 90-10 split, it's going to be 76.5 to the distributor. With the 70% floor, it's going to be 70,000 to the distributor. Now, which way do you think the contract is written? So the distributor gets the greater amount or the less amount? The greater amount, right? So in essence, what you see here is that here's what the distributor gets, right? It's going to be based upon this 76.5. Right? Let's assume it's a few weeks later. We got box office now of 60,000. We've got a 60-40 split, right? Because now we're in, say, week, and it could be whatever week you want it to be. It's week 3, it's week 2, it's week 4, it's week 5, however the contract is written. With a 50% floor. Okay. So now we've got our 60,000 minus our 15. So here's our box office is 60. Our theater's nut is 15. So we've got 45,000 in gross ticket sales times 0.6. 27,000. All right. So if we're on the 60-40 split of box office after nut, the distributor gets 27,000. Or we're on a 50% floor. There's what we're going to get, our 30,000, right? So typically speaking, on average, the rough amount, half a box office goes to the distributor. About half goes to the theater, roughly speaking. So if you're the theater, why would you agree to that? Exactly, and where is that other place? Concessions. So the largest source of profit for the theater is the concessions. So you have profit margins here of 50 to 90% on the stuff. Right? How many of you guys have ever worked in fast food or worked anything at all with serving soda? How does the soda come? As a box, right? I remember being 16 years old and working my first job at I was actually at the movie theater. All right? The soda comes in a box. Soda in a box. This is disgusting, right? But that's in essence what it is. And they sell the drinks in all kinds of different prices, right? So they'll have like the small, they'll have a medium, and they'll have a large. And maybe, I'm making up numbers here, maybe this one's $2, this one's $2.50, and this one's $3, right? What's the marginal cost to go from small to medium, or from medium to large? How long does that box of syrup last? A long time. Which means the marginal cost to go from 12 ounces to 16 ounces is really small, right? When I was working, and that was a long time ago, the cost of a soda was about a nickel. That's the cost. Most of that cost was not the syrup, it was the cup. So of this nickel cost for all of these guys, most of the cost is the cup. And then a little bit of the cost is the syrup mixed with some water. But if I sell it for $3, it's huge, as opposed to 2. I get a whole extra dollar profit here with essentially a marginal cost that's essentially 0. It's not exactly 0, but it's pretty darn close, right? And of course, this isn't the only cost, right? You have the cost of the labor, the 16-year-old kid that's got to sit there and make it and then complain about stuff. You've got all these other costs. It's not the only cost, but essentially that's what it is. So let's think about this. The theater wants what? What's most important to it? How does it get that? On concessions, which means it has to have what? And how do you get sales? A whole bunch of people coming through, right? So the theater wants lots of people because not everyone is going to buy concessions, right? Obviously. And the amount that they buy might vary, right? So they buy the small, not the large, so they lost out on a whole buck of profit essentially for free. So the theater wants lots of people. And how do you get lots of people in there? What has to be true about the price of those movies? And what do you call reasonable? Low price or high price? Low. So they want lots of people. In order to get lots of people, you got to have a low price. Right? Would you guys pay $20 to go see, well, you might see Star Wars. Would you guys Steel Magnolias with Julia Roberts? Does that movie, or all guys in here except one girl, right? Just the one? Did you ever see Steel Magnolias?
I have no idea what that is.
Okay, she doesn't even know what it is. All right. What's the good chick flick that people are watching now? I don't have the slightest idea. Cliche, romantic comedy, chick flick. Right? We all know what this is because we've all had to go see them. Right? The guy and the girl, he stumbles over, oh, I dropped my soda. Or she drops her soda and he picks it up or whatever. Oh, we meet, it was magic. Blah, blah, blah. They date for a while, then they have some kind of conflict, and then they get back together in the end, and they all go off together. Oh, it's so wonderful, blah, blah, blah. Right? And your girlfriend or your wife is like, oh, I love that movie, it's so wonderful, blah, blah, blah. And what are we thinking? God, this is dumb. I'm just here because I like you and I love you and I want to spend time with you, and it all can't be about me, right? And then you got other movies, you know, Starship Troopers, right? That movie's great. It's got violence, it's got sex, and it's got special effects. Those are the three things that you need in a movie, right? And so when my wife goes and watches Starship Troopers, she's like, this thing is dumb. There's not giant bugs on a planet that are trying to kill people. It's like, it's not a matter of the bugs. It's got violence. People are getting killed. People are having sex. And look at these cool special effects. All right? So theaters want lots of people coming in, and the way to ensure that is this low price, right? Because if this guy right here is $30, oh, baby, I'm sorry, I don't have the money. I got laid off at work, or they cut my hours back. I'm so sorry. All right? But if it's $3, she knows that's excuse isn't going to work. We're going to go see this movie, all right? So the theaters want lots of people, low prices. What do distributors want? High prices. Fewer people. It doesn't matter if this guy's 30, if he's 3, if he's 1, or if he's free. Guys, are you going to go see this on your own? No. High price. Charge the $30, we'll get the guy and his girlfriend. There's $60 right there. Because even if the price is free, we know that those are the only two people going to watch it anyway. So we might as well get them for as much as we can. So we have, in essence, this conflict that is set up, right, where the theater says, hey, we want lots of people. Lots of people sells popcorn. In order to get lots of people through the door, we need a low price. The distributor says, I don't care about the number of people. I don't care about your popcorn. We want high prices. We don't care about the number of people coming through, right? And so because of this, we have all of this type of contracting that's set up into place to get this stuff set up, and you have this constant back and forth between these guys. How are we going to do this? How are we going to release this stuff? So when we're looking at, what time do we get out of here? 10:55? Okay. So we'll pick it up from here on Friday.